All right, we now welcome on NFL and NFL draft writer and content creator for PFF, also the co-host of the NFL Stock Exchange podcast, the now two-time guest on the Giant Take podcast, Trevor Sikkema. Trevor, thank you so much for coming back on to take our questions once again about the NFL draft. You were able to go through the hassle last time, so I appreciate you coming back and making your return on the podcast.
No, I appreciate you guys having me back on. This is a lot of fun last year, and I'm sure it'll be a lot of fun now. So I'm excited. I'm excited to really dig into this.
Yeah, obviously last year when we talked about this, the Giants had picks 5 and 7 in last year's draft. This year they did a little bit better in the season, obviously made the playoffs, to our delight, obviously. And now they have pick 25, 10 picks in total throughout the draft. And they obviously just recently traded one of their picks, their pick 100 that they got from the Chiefs for Kadarius Toney for Darren Waller. So that kind of shakes things up in terms of looking at the draft board and, what positions are going to be, filled at what spots. And that certainly shakes things up as well. But I mean, getting right into it, wide receiver is obviously the big thing that every Giants fan wants, that everyone's talking about that Giants need. Obviously, we have a whole bunch of receivers. We brought in, Paris Campbell. We just signed Jamison Crowder, brought back Darius Slayton, Sterling Shepard. Obviously, Isaiah Hodgins is here. But Giants fans, including myself, are looking for that number one guy for Daniel Jones. Darren Waller's kind of a nice piece to have on the side. Obviously, he can kind of act as a number one, but he is obviously a tight end. What do you think about this wide receiver class? It's complicated because at pick 25, there might not be the cream of the crop left at the wide receiver position. And then you wait till pick 57 in the second round or even pick 89 in the third round. And then you're kind of, taking a chance on some guys who probably do not have that wide receiver one upside.
Yeah, and when it comes to wide receiver, obviously this is something that a lot of people look at with the Giants, but for the type of wide receiver that they want, that high caliber wide receiver one type of player, they normally don't make it to 25, even if one of them exists in this class. Because I think there's a lot of wide receivers that you could like. Jackson Smith and Jigba, really productive a couple of years ago before the injury-riddled season this past year, at over 1,600 receiving yards, that monster Rose Bowl game that everybody remembers. He's probably just a slot-only guy. I'm not sure he has the vertical speed to be able to get up the sideline, consistently threaten that way, and be an outside receiver. So I think that his skill set and just what he has with athleticism makes him a slot-only guy, but still could be really productive. I think that Zay Flowers is a smaller wide receiver, but a guy who brings a lot of athleticism into the position, can play a lot of different spots along the line of scrimmage, both on the line of scrimmage and off the line of scrimmage. Quentin Johnston, he gives you the size, 6'4", 210, 215 pounds. He gives you good athleticism after the catch. He gives you that above the rim ability, but he wasn't nearly as productive as you would think a NFL wide receiver one would have been while he was at TCU. Jordan Addison, beautiful route runner, former Biletnikoff winner, but just a little bit smaller in size. So I rattle off all of those names to say there's good wide receivers in this class. Is there the wide receiver that's going to make the difference in this Giants wide receiver room? I'm not sure, because you look at who they have, and you mentioned Darren Waller. I think that that's a huge addition for them. I think that really helps out. And even though he is a tight end, that's definitely something that factors into the equation. But Wan'Dale Robinson, Paris Campbell, Isaiah Hodgins, Darius Slayton, Sterling Shepard, even Jamison Crowder, right? Those are 6 solid wide receivers. If you're going to pick a wide receiver at 25, he has to be better than them. It has to be a difference-making type of receiver. And I think the only one that really makes sense in my mind for New York is Quentin Johnston. If you believe Quentin Johnston has that size, speed, strength, combination, whose best football or production-wise certainly is still ahead of him, it's going to be in the NFL, he's the one guy that I look at to say, if the Giants are going to take one in round one, he's probably the only one that I would seriously consider because of those reasons.
That was what I was thinking initially as well when looking at this wide receiving class. But I almost feel like after hearing what Joe Shane and Brian Dable have kind of emphasized when talking about wide receivers, that they really want separators. They want guys who aren't just, contested catch guys. Not necessarily that Johnston is just a contested catch guy, but someone who could, really has elite separation. Someone maybe like Zay Flowers, maybe Jordan Addison, even though I don't think he's as good as that. as Zay Flowers. I think that's where the Giants would end up going, to a lot of people's surprise. At least that's just kind of how I look at it. They've done a lot of work on those guys, on the wide receiving, on those round one wide receivers. And some people may say, oh, that means they're going to take one, or they were just trying to do their due diligence and maybe they think, okay, none of these guys are up to par. What do you think in terms of like who is the best separator out of these guys in round one, or even going a little bit deeper into the draft?
Well, I think Tank Dell certainly goes into this, but he's a lot smaller. The reason why the incredible Houston wide receiver is a separating master is because of the body control he has, and he has the body control because he's 5'8", 160 pounds. So he's able to start and stop better than almost any wide receiver in this class. But he's up there when you start to talk about separation ability. I think the route running savviness of Jordan Addison allows him to be at the top of the list with separation. Jackson Smith and Jigba showed at the combine his elite change direction and agility drills when it came to the 3-cone and the short shuttle shows that he really knows how to stop on a dime and create that separation for you. But I do agree that I think I would lean towards Zay Flowers because I think that Zay gives you the ability to separate both with quickness and with long speed. I do think that he does have the long speed to consistently threaten vertically. Is he the fastest guy in this class? No, I wouldn't say that. But he does give you that all-around ability to be a good separator. Now, I will say this. Every team in the NFL wants good separating wide receivers, right? I mean, it's just that is the part of the position that makes it easy for quarterbacks. When you have a bigger throwing window, it's a lot less pressure. They can be a lot more confident when they're delivering you the ball. And obviously, you just put a lot more stress on the defense. So where, sure, Joe Shane is definitely going to emphasize separation, and he would be smart to do so, that's kind of what every team is going to go for. So it's I don't know if it's as much of like, oh, we're honing in on Zay Flowers for that reason. It could be a reason why they end up selecting a guy like that if they end up doing it, but I don't think it's this, we got to get this kind of a guy no matter what from our wide receiver room. So that's kind of my overview of all that.
Alex, do you have something in response to that? No?
No, I'll let you go. Go ahead.
All right, yeah. So before I wanted to make sure you were concrete with your wide receiver discussion, because I want to transition now to a different position now with center, because this episode actually, I guess what our listeners just heard was we actually ranked the top interior offensive linemen. We're going through kind of each week, and we're ranking a separate position of need for the Giants. So we've done wide receivers, we've done cornerbacks. Is that it, Alex? We did, I think.
We might linebackers, maybe
linebackers too.
Linebackers.
Okay, so we did those
before they signed Bobby Okereke, so that kind of ruined that whole thing. But yeah,
hey, Jack Campbell, maybe we'll see.
Maybe.
But now, when it comes to centers, I want to talk to you about, because we actually also did a New York Giants. Our last episode was a New York Giants 7-round mock draft, and Alex had luckily when he did it had John Michael Schmitz falling to him at 57.
Ooh,
so I want to talk to you about kind of your ranking of the centers. I know we got John Michael Schmitz is probably in there. I'm sure Luke Weipler, maybe Joe Tipperman, and was it Steve Avia too from TCU. Mm-hmm. Kind of where do you rank those guys on your list?
Yeah, well, I don't think Michael Schmitz is going to make it to 57. I think
agreed.
If he does, obviously I think they got to jump all over him. He's just John Michael Schmitz gives you really good size and strength for the center position. He's a bigger type of center, and I don't think there's a lot of centers that come through the draft that have the size that he and Joe Tippmann, honestly, from Wisconsin have. It's a bigger center class, and any offensive lines who are trying to get better on the interior, who especially might need a center, I think are going to be really in on this class. And that's why I ultimately don't think that Michael Schmitz is going to make it to 57, just because you don't really get this very often. A lot of centers are the smaller guys, right? They've got to get lower in the stance. You're trying to get the leverage. They got to be quick to snap the ball and get back into their stance. And, of course, centers are sometimes guys who could be pullers and move as well. So I think that you often just get smaller centers by nature of what they're asked to do. But when you get players like John Michael Schmitz specifically, who had a fantastic Senior Bowl, showed that he could go up against guys one-on-one, really knew how to stand his own, whether it was against speed or power, or another athletic, bigger center like Joe Tippmann from Wisconsin, those guys just don't last very long. And I do think that the Creed Humphrey effect, where the NFL just let Creed Humphrey slide and slide and slide until the Kansas City Chiefs got on the board at the back end of the second round, and they were like, okay, if you let this good football player fall to us, I guess we're going to draft him. And they undervalued the center position to a fault. And now we see what Creed Humphrey is able to do with the Chiefs on their interior. So I think that center investments and interior offensive line investments, they often get overlooked. People think that they're low value, low return on investment, but I don't think that's the case, especially when you get a good one. So those are two guys. Luke Weipler as well. I think that he's in that list as another center that you got to keep your eye on. I don't know if Avila is going to play center at the next level. I feel like he's a guard. Like I feel like his home's at guard. He's more of a power player in that regard. Trying to think if I'm forgetting anybody. Jarrett Patterson from Notre Dame, I think he's got a lot of experience, but he's got some versatility too. He can play inside and out. Honestly, those three. Oh, the Michigan guy. Oluwatimi. I think that he also played really well at the Senior Bowl. I think that he had a good showing, and I think that he could be another center who's drafted decently high. Honestly, with Oluwatimi, with Weipler, with Tittman, with John Michael Schmitz, I bet we see 4 centers go at least in the first 4 rounds, but I think I'd be more confident to say the first 3 rounds, which we don't often. That's not often the case, but I think these guys are that well liked.
Yeah, I mean, there's all these NFL teams that want good offensive linemen to protect their quarterback, right? If they want, you look like a guy with Joe Burrow and the Bengals being able to rebuild that offensive line. These teams want to make it deep in the playoffs. They want to win Super Bowls. And the same thing with the New York Giants, since they're locking up Daniel Jones for that amount of years, of 4 years, you're going to want protection for Jones to get the ball out of his hands to hopefully weapons like Darren Waller. I wanted to actually ask you about Avila a little bit when doing my research on him. In the national championship, I did actually think he played at guard, right? More than center, yeah. So, I mean, that definitely makes sense if the majority of his final year in college he played guard. I could definitely see him more as a guard than at a center. Do you remember specifically when his center snaps were, like the majority of them?
Ooh, let me check. I can actually check right now for you. It's going to take me a second. TCU, let's see, offensive line this past year. PFF has the organization of the data that they have is unbelievable. So Avila played over 1,000 snaps at left guard this year, right, and he only played 7 snaps at center. So he was basically guard exclusive this past season.
Okay, I was going to say, so his center snaps probably came in obviously younger years, maybe when he was an underclassman.
Yeah, I can see that for you in a second too. Hold on, player position pivot.
Hey, if you have a PFF content creator with you, you have to take advantage of it.
So yes, he did. He split his time between center and I believe it was left guard still in 2021. Did the same in 2020. So he played 382 snaps at center in 2020, 696 in 2021, and then he played almost exclusively at left guard this past season.
Okay, perfect. That's what I wanted to know. Thank you.
There you go. No problem.
With this surplus of centers here, I think the Giants would be better off waiting to pick 57 in round 2, where you can probably get a really, really good, maybe it's not John Michael Schmitz, but one of the other guys we just discussed. And you get good value there. Obviously, the Giants have no centers on their roster currently, so that's a big position of need. You've got some guys, you've got some developmental guards. They drafted Azudu last year. Hopefully he can take a step up from North Carolina. We had McKeithen. He tore his ACL in preseason. So there are some options at guard, but it seems like at center, obviously you could always sign a veteran center in free agency. There are quite a few still available, but I think you see the impact that some of these great centers have, right? Jason Kelsey for the Eagles is the first one that comes to mind. I think if you can get one of these guys who can really be that leader of this offensive line next to Andrew Thomas and hopefully Evan Neal, because I think he's the most important person for the Giants this offseason, is that he can hopefully progress. And then you kind of have 3 main guys on the offensive line, and that's what I think is going to be the most important for them. And going to the other side of the ball, the defensive line, Joe Shane made a big statement, I guess, saying that we needed to beef up the defensive line. We didn't have enough depth on that side of the ball. Leonard Williams and Dexter Lawrence were playing 90+% of the snaps last season in pretty much all the games. They signed Nacho from the Buccaneers, or where he was last season, to a 3-year deal. A lot of people were surprised about that. They want to get more and more depth on that defensive line. Not necessarily for the Giants here, but this is more of a general question. Jalen Carter, obviously there's the whole controversy, legal ramifications.
Mm-hmm.
How far is he going to drop? How far do you think he is going to drop? I assume not to 25 all the way to the Giants.
No, I don't think he's making it all the way to 25. The Giants should probably love that.
We can hope. We can always wish.
You can. I mean, at this point in time, you can certainly hope. I won't rule anything out, but I do think that he's probably still going to be a back end of the top 10 kind of a player. When Laramie Tunsil, the incident that happened with him, with the video coming out on draft night, there was a lot less time to evaluate things. I think he went 13th. And he was supposed to go basically within the top 3. And I think the reason why he fell even further outside of the top 10 is because people just didn't know. There wasn't enough time to figure out what happened, what was going on. There's a lot of time to figure out what's going on with Jalen Carter. And I'm not saying that means for sure he's going to be a top 10 guy, but it just feels like it doesn't feel like his stock is tanking to the point where he's going to be picked in the 20s or the back half of the first round. As of right now, I would still tell you he's probably going to be a back end of the top 10 kind of a guy.
Yeah. I don't think there's no way he gets past the Eagles at 10. I'll just tell you that. Howie loves those defensive linemen. Never would let him pass. Yeah.
And then I got one guard I wanted to talk about. We don't have to go through the whole position, but I think I'm going with O'Cyrus Torrence here. Is there a chance, obviously, besides like the ideal height and weight that you want, over, I think he's 6'5" and over like 330 pounds. It's just like a perfect size guard that you want. Is there a chance he falls to 25? Is that possible? Because actually I saw that more earlier in the offseason in like the January, February months. And now as we move closer, I see him going in the teens. So is that still a possibility for the Giants?
I always felt like O'Cyrus Torrence's range was anywhere from the middle of the first round to the end of the first round to the early parts of the second round. Like he has a large range just because you don't know how teams are going to prioritize interior offensive linemen. I mean, O'Cyrus Torrence, if you're a running team, if you want to stay really balanced and if you're still prioritizing the run game, this guy's a people mover, man. I mean, like he was unbelievable when he was at Louisiana Lafayette. He was phenomenal. He was one of the best offensive linemen in his only season with the Florida Gators this past year in the SEC. So he's proven that it doesn't matter what the competition level is. He's up for it. He's big, he's strong, and he's just one of the best interior guards that you're going to get in this entire class. So I don't know if he's for sure going to be the first interior offensive lineman on the board because I do think John Michael Schmitz is gaining a lot of steam. Joe Tippmann is gaining a lot of steam as well. But he's in that conversation. So to answer your question, yes, there's definitely a reality where he could potentially make it to number 25 if the Giants want to take that there.
And like I said, offensive line, it's not, center, literally the position we need because we have 0 centers on the roster. But definitely guard as well is definitely a position of need for the Giants too. Okay, so my final question for you, yourself and Connor Rogers, your co-host on the NFL Shock and Change podcast. You guys have a lot of experience doing the mock drafts, looking at mock drafts. So I'm going to leave it to the expert here as your best option, or you can give options for the Giants at 25. Who do you think they end up with?
So I actually just did an article about this, some perfect player matches, and the one that I landed on that I like the most is Brian Branch, the safety from Alabama, simply because, he's so versatile in what he does. I think he can certainly play both safety spots for you. You probably don't want him living at free safety, but we know he's a phenomenal nickel defender. That's what he played this past year a lot for the Alabama Crimson Tide defense, and with them losing Julian Love, Love was very versatile for what they did. He played most of his snaps at free safety, but he still played in the box plenty. He played in the slot, almost 200 snaps in the slot. So you don't just get to replace that versatility with anybody. And I think if they have a chance to take Brian Branch, that would be a really good choice for them. So he's somebody that I've had my eye on for them. Wide receiver, if Quentin Johnston makes it to 25, I think about that. I think that that's something I consistently go towards as well. But, man, I think those are the two that really stand out to me as I'm kind of scrolling the big board now, especially for the moves that they made in free agency. A lot of that roster is well-rounded. Not that it's as good as it can be yet, but it feels very well-rounded. And then I guess I will throw in a guy that we've already talked about plenty. The last mock draft that Connor and I did, with just the two of us, it was Connor who selected John Michael Schmitz for them at 25. So those seem to be the 3 players, either Quentin Johnston, Brian Branch, or John Michael Schmitz, who recently we've really been gravitating towards with that number 25 pick.
Yeah, I mean it's different from last year when we were at 5-7 last year. There's a limited amount of players that you kind of consider. We were talking about, what was it last year? It was Neil Aquanu, a little bit of Charles Cross, and then from the edge rusher guys, we had Trayvon Walker. Thibodeau, obviously, we ended up selecting Hutchinson. Not that anyone thought he would fall that far. This year, you're at 25. You really don't know, what's going to happen, who's going to be there, who's not going to be there. There's always a surprise guy who falls. There's always a guy, who's taken earlier than expected. So I feel like it's tough to predict it. I feel like Josh gave you a tough question there. But I think it might not be a position that the Giants necessarily, you might think, is one of their top needs. It might not be a wide receiver or an offensive lineman or, cornerback, which a lot of people have been talking about, that cornerback number 2 position for the Giants. I think, a safety or even a defensive lineman, who falls, an edge rusher, even though they kind of got those 2 guys there, in Thibodeau and Ojulari. I feel like there's a lot of flexibility, and I think the Giants will probably go best player available on their board, not, kind of not looking as much into need as they might have, last year or in previous years.
And I think that that's what they did in free agency. They gave themselves that flexibility. And I love the mindset that Joe Shane has towards the draft of not only best player available, but also the players who are just going to give you the most return on investment. That's what the NFL draft is all about. And that's why you prioritize the premium positions the way they did last year. And I expect them to do the same moving forward. I really do.
NFL and NFL Draft content creator for PFF, co-host of the NFL Stock Exchange podcast at Tampa Bay Trey on Twitter. Trevor, thank you so much again for joining us on the podcast this offseason. We really appreciate your help and your draft expertise, man. Thank you so much.
Appreciate it, guys. I'll see you next year, I hope.